Machines, and Metaphors, organized by Ingrid. And I'm going to be presiding, but in all likelihood, I'm just going to be stepping back and letting people up here speak. So let me tell you a bit about them, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about. Beginning on this side over here, we have Gregory. You can follow her on Twitter at Claudia Kincaid. She's a PhD and a lecturer in sociology at the Center for Worker Education, the Division of Interdisciplinary Studies, right here at the City College of New York. Welcome, Karen. And you can clap because we don't have neighbors over there. Yay, no neighbors. No, I'm sorry. We're talking about here. But it is nice. We can hopefully speak at this volume and not disturb anyone. Moving along, we have Debbie Chatra, who's at Debcha on Twitter, if you want to follow her. She's an associate professor of material science at Olin College of Engineering. Her research, teaching, and consulting work focuses on biomaterials, the engineering student experience, and gender and diversity in science and technology. Welcome, Deb. Sports something is about to happen here. I'm not really sure. I'm not comfortable with that. No, I got it. Okay. Then moving over here, we have Damien Williams, who's at Wolpin on Twitter. He's a writer, a researcher, a pedagogical privateer at the various intersections of philosophy, religious studies, magical techno-futurism, and popular culture. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
me. And then we have Ingrid Burrington, who's at Life Winning on Twitter. If you're not following her, you're not winning at life. She makes jokes and maps and lives on a small island off the coast of America that we are currently standing on. Welcome, Ingrid.
And unfortunately, Eleanor
yes.
Eleanor could not join us. We miss her. We conjure her in our presence.
At Dimaxion on the Twitter. Okay.
Follow her anyway.
So to start, I'm going to kick this over to Ingrid because the reason we're all here is we gathered, which sounds more ominous than it really is, at an event called Magic Codes that Ingrid coordinated. And we're going to borrow a little bit from what we did there to sort of set the tone for this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm borrowing something that I learned from Erin Jack, who runs the Center for Tactical Magic out in California. So I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. Do it? All right, thank you. And I want you to all just think. Try and picture in your head the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word magic. Okay, you got it? Keep your eyes closed. Raise your hand if you thought of a wizard in a hat. Raise your hand if you thought of a person pulling something out of a hat. Okay. Raise your hand if you thought of like a dragon or some like cool mystical shit. Or colors. Raise your hand if I haven't caught what you were imagining at all. All right, you guys can like open your eyes now. And the point being, you all raised your hands at different points for very different things. And this was a thing that we did to start Magic Codes. The point being that when people say the word magic, it literally conjures up so many different things. And yet, it's this incredibly permeable thing that finds its way into the way that we talk about technology really, really regularly, and is like a weirdly fertile ground for discussing things that we're not always super comfortable talking about. But being clear that when people say magic, they mean a variety of different things. Sometimes they mean personal beliefs that people hold like very dear and personal, and it's really kind of important to be mindful of those different things.
Thank you, Ingrid. I forgot to tell you all who I am. My name is Melissa Gira Grant. You can follow me on Twitter at Melissa Gira. And I am so drawn to this subject for very personal reasons because I had practiced magic at one point in my life, so it's one of the few things I don't talk about on the internet and won't be talking about here either. But I do have very vivid memories of the very first time anyone tried to explain the internet to me. It was picking up somebody's 1994 copy of Wired magazine. And the metaphor for people who use the internet that Wired magazine was pushing in that moment were people that they described as zippies. Does anyone remember this? Or how embarrassing this was? The zippies were like techno-pagans, basically. They were like techno-shamans. And this was a moment in like the mid-90s where like this idea of like magic and the internet felt very inseparable. And one of the things that has been interesting in listening to all of you talk, and both at Magic Codes and the conversation we're going to have here, is how magic functions very differently in how we talk about the internet. If anything, the internet is as unmagical as it has ever been. It is ubiquitous, it's common. And on the other, but we also don't fully understand how it works. And one of the common things, even when I think folks on this panel who aren't practitioners talk about magic, when they talk about the internet, it's often used as a way of obscuring how things really work, and a way of obscuring how power operates. And I think one of the things I love about magic as a metaphor for the internet is it takes us right into that part of talking about power. So that's about all I'm going to say to set this up. What I want each of you to do before you dive into your remarks, and I'll give you a little prompt for that, is to just say very quickly like what your own definition of magic is, and that can also include refusing to have a personal definition of magic. And I'm going to start with Damien. So one of the things I feel like we have to talk about right off the bat is magical practice. Like, you know, let's start to like recognize that this is something that is a practice for people. And what I want to ask you is, what are some ways that magical practice have enhanced technology, your understanding of technology, or your use of technology? And let us know what you mean by magic.
What I'm generally talking about when I'm talking about magic is kind of a combination of different themes and concepts working in concert with each other. I'm talking about the ideas of Aleister Crowley. I'm talking about a more religious ritual practice. I'm talking about psychological practices. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the ideas of chaos magic, but this blends a lot of these elements together into a kind of catch-as-catch-can overarching practice, and taking what works and leaving what doesn't is the basic underlying principle there. So generally when I'm talking about magic, I'm talking about these ideas used in a way to kind of create change in the world through a kind of emotional, evocative resonance. And that change can either be in a more spooky, mystical action at a distance kind of way, or it can be in the kind of changing the way people think and understand about certain ideas, or it can be both of those things, or something completely other than that. So the question of the ways in which I think magic and thinking about magic have helped, have helped our engagement with technology and have changed the way I think about tech. I think that, as you were actually saying at the outset, this kind of idea has often existed that internet and technology and magic are kind of inseparable. And as you say, we've kind of gotten to this point where they're inseparable. They're still ubiquitous in our daily lives. But at the same time, I think that we do still have this idea of the hidden, the unseen, the literally occult aspects of the technology that we use every day. These things are in constant usage to us, but they are unknown to us. They are unworkable to us unless we take special pains to initiate ourselves into the ways of their workings, unless we take special opportunities to become the kind of people who can do that special kind of work to make connections and operations that go unseen and unknown by the vast majority of others. And at the same time, on a more fundamental level, magic and technology are inherently connected. They come from the same roots, especially if you look at things like Greek magical and ritual practice. Techne is art, it's craft, it's creation, it is the workings of technology, but it's also a term for the workings of magic. Magic as an art form, magic as a practice. And you actually see in Greek mythology, the goddesses of magic are also often the goddesses of technology. Athena and Hecate are goddesses of both of these things. They are goddesses of crossroads and communications and knowledge and tech, and knowledge and craft and knowledge and creation. So these ideas have very often been, in our minds, blended, connected, and we've gone through great pains to kind of, on a top level, separate them. To say magic is this thing over here that we use, this concept that we used, and we couldn't think of something better. And now that we have science and technology, we can throw magic away. But undergirding all of that work, there's still this kind of fundamental, this thing does something special, does something that I don't quite understand, and it does it in this very unknowable way. So that's generally where my mind goes in the blending of those things.
I'm going to of move us to the tensions that are in what you were talking about. I wrote down a couple of things from your remarks: change, residence, initiation, and workings. And workings is going to be my, hopefully not ham-fisted, segue to Karen to talk about labor, and also to talk about, in your definition of magic, but also I think what's interesting in your work, because you've studied people who, I don't know, I would define the tarot practitioners as people who may even think of themselves as practicing magic, but they have made work out of producing the experience of practicing magic. So can you talk a little bit about, through this idea of workings, what are some of the things when we talk about magic as a metaphor or a reference in technology, what this obscures and how we can refuse what it obscures?
Okay, thanks, Melissa. That's a great question. But maybe just to give you some context of what I'm talking about, I wrote my dissertation on tarot card readers and psychics in New York City. And so I came to technology sort of through a deck of cards, which, again, just as Damien was saying, we tend to think, oh, this is this new digital datified world that is upon us, but in many ways, even just that conversation already obscures our relationship to technology. And actually it's through the deck of cards that people discover magic. They discover personal magic, they discover ceremonial magic, they discover chaos magic. The tarot is literally a compendium, or some people call it a living book. So it accommodates many, many different magical practices. My interest in working with tarot card readers and people who are literally becoming psychic, the people in my dissertation had been pushed out of a formal labor market and were finding themselves in what we call now precarity. When I started it, that word was still sort of new, but of course we all know this, maybe even too intimately at this point, that the labor markets have different plans for our lives than maybe we did. So, under those conditions, sometimes people turn to things like personal transformation and self-betterment or empowerment. There's a ton of different words, but people turn to like Plan B. And so many of the people in my dissertation literally had turned to magic, to tarot, to all kinds of different self-care practices because they were searching for a new way forward. So it is a combination of kind of technology that's not quite digital and personal transformation. Of course, where all of that dovetails into now a culture of entrepreneurialism and a culture of personal transformation and turning yourself and your work with any technologies. Not just your computer, not just your digital personal data, but everything, pen, paper, all technologies are now being asked to be subsumed to a kind of entrepreneurial exposure of your personal life. So if you ask your question again, I might be able to answer it.
I'll go back, yeah. So, I mean, there's two things there. I mean, like, I'm not talking to my microphone, I'm sorry. You're so entrancing now, I'm just like falling into your stuff. I'm gonna stop doing that, I'm sorry, it's really early. What I'm hearing and what you're saying, and then I'll try to connect it back to my question, is this idea of workings. You know, that magic is like it is a practice. It's not just a metaphor, it's something that's actually like very intimately connected to physical reality, to the ways that we provide for ourselves. And one of the things that you raise is that also can obscure some things about what the metaphor of magic stands in for. Like, and I'm thinking about that in the labor of the people that are the subject of your dissertation. Like, how is it that by saying that they're practicing magic, or when we think about technology as something that's magical, it hides the actual operations of what it's doing from?
So I think your question is getting to the heart of the matter. It's sort of, no matter whether the people I'm looking at are actually practicing different magical traditions, magic with a K, there is an element at which they are engaging in a kind of magic of the economy. Make something happen, right? Engage in this speculative economy. Engage in what is not real capital anymore, but what we call now fictitious capital. And so Web 2.0 technologies, as many of you know this, offered people a kind of moment to not work, not labor, but to participate, right? To share, to communicate, to speak to one another, to network, to, in the words of Oprah, live your best life ever. So it's through that magic of self-transformation, which sits at this interstice of precarity, of entrepreneurialism, of digital technologies, and of course, personal magic. I mean, I'm impressed every day that people go on in this, literally. So on the one hand, the magic I'm talking about is both an act of resistance and it's also very much an act of commodification. So where we want to think about what is being obscured there, not just the kind of power relations and economic relations, but how we as individual subjects, how do we live in this? And what role then does that magic take? Because what kind of subjects are we becoming? I just saw someone on Twitter the other day ask this question, like, what kind of people are we becoming in all of this? And to some degree, what role does this magic, like, yeah, we're magical, we don't die, it's not killing us, but what is it also obscuring as we move forward and believe that we actually can find any kind of agency or empowerment in this particular political economy?
I'm glad you brought it back to agency too, because I feel like that's one of the kind of tricky things when we're talking about magic, is it feels like it's a way to take agency over precarity. It is a way to kind of find your way through. But on the other hand, there are other forces. Yeah. There are greater forces. Yeah. And sometimes we can lose sight of that. And Web 2.0 is a magical fiction that we're all still living under, is something we're sort of invoking more strongly into the conversation. I'm sorry, I did it again. I'm just going to acknowledge that. Language is magic. So science, we haven't really gone there yet. And this is a nice segue for you. You're a scientist. Like, what are you doing talking about magic? Like, what's going on? Why are you, where does this connect for you? No, I know why you're here, because you're brilliant. But you've also, one of the things I think in your work is, you're trying to make less obscure these things that, we sometimes want to ascribe to having magical function, and the reality of that is that it's much more complex.
Sure. Can someone confirm, is my mic on? This one's live, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm an engineering educator. I have a degree in engineering. I am. The thing that I do professionally, of course, is teach people to understand and then create technology. So actually a few months ago, I was at the Haunted Machines conference, which was convened by Nat Kane, who's probably here somewhere. And Ingrid spoke, and Joanne and George, who are also in this audience. And a friend of mine asked me, or asked generally, he said, so what does open source magic look like? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, you can make a really good argument that open source magic is science, right? That it's about reproducibility, and it's about sharing, and that you can fork it and do different things, and you sort of test it and see if it works. And of course, there is a sort of historical connection between things like alchemy moving into science. So the real sort of big shift that's underpinning all of what we're talking about magic and technology is really the shift from sort of mechanical systems to electronics that's really underpinned by semiconductors. So semiconductors are not, you cannot look at a semiconductor and understand what it is. I mean, as far as you can tell looking at it, it's a magic rock, right? It's like silicon that has something, I mean, first of all, it's ultra pure silicon. It has something done to it that I'm happy to explain to you after if you're interested. But there's it's completely opaque, right? There's no way of understanding what it is. And I have a newish car because I live in Boston, but I work in the suburbs. And I popped the hood a few months after I bought it. And it basically is just like nice blue thing. It has the logo of the manufacturer, and it has like a little yellow thing on the side that says put windshield wiper fluid here. And otherwise, it pretty much just says there are no user-serviceable parts inside, right? So we really moved away. Everyone's like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I would like work on my car. It's like, I can't work on my car. I can't work on my car without plugging a computer into it for a start. So just this idea of technology becoming more and more opaque, that it really lends itself to the sort of Arthur C. Clarke's, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So first of all, in terms of my personal relationship with magic, there's multifaceted ways in which people interact with magic, but one way I do not interact with magic is that technology is magic, right? I mean, basically, I might not understand how it works, but technology to me is never magic. It's a system. And actually, Scott Westerfeld put this beautifully at The Novelist a few weeks ago. He said, flying carpets are magic, and if you can go ahead and buy one, it's technology. So first of all, of course, I'm in the business of actually making things that appear to be magical transparent to my students. But the other piece of this is the idea of if you're the person who understands how the technology works, that you can be part of the technological priesthood, and I use that gender term advisedly. So I really am not interested in my students growing up to be technologists who try to accrue that kind of power to themselves, right? I don't want them to say, well, my job is to obscure technology because I want to be, revered, i.e. paid lots of money, and I want them to actually think about what they do in the larger social context. So that's really what my interests are in terms of technology and magic, and we'll talk about other things.
I'm going to move this to Ingrid now. Do you have a mic? You got a mic, okay. Why are we talking about this now? Like, why this moment? Like, we talked a little bit at the beginning. I talked a little bit about this kind of like sabers being passed. But the 90s, my prevailing introductory metaphor to the internet was one of magic. And the way that we're talking about magic, it feels really different from that moment. I mean, that was like very kind of like alt, hippie, it was grounded in a group of people who actually maybe did even practice magic in their real life. And what's going on now, like, it's not ironic. It's like, it just feels like a way of like grasping. It's like, what do we call this thing? What does it mean? And you really identified that wasn't like pulling this group of people together, but I want you to say more about that. Why now?
Well, I could maybe speak to why I'm excited. It's something that's sort of ongoing, and lots of people have been kind of reaching at, be it from, when we were working on magic codes to haunted machines to other things. And I think where I first started really noticing it, like where it got really volatile, maybe it was when I started following more crypto people, honestly, because there's this weird power dynamic in that scene, especially like the security stuff, because like there's a constant sort of condescending frustration and people who do not understand how something works and like eye-rolling that this is not fucking magic. But you also have like a crew of people who really want you to know that they're fucking wizards, like Chris DeGoy will talk shit about like people on the Washington Post talking about magic golden keys, but he also wants you to know he's the smartest guy in the room. Oh shit, don't tell him I said that.
Too late.
But like the kind of, there's like power dynamics, right? And a lot of it, like a lot of what I was seeing was also like invoking this like super like Tolkien, Celtic, very white power magic. And that I thought was also just really interesting, that it's like, this is what people in this space are grasping towards, and like, how is that influencing the way that they think about things, and where are there other kinds of magics? Because there are, right? And so in trying to kind of get together a room full of people who were doing that, who were like to discuss that, basically, I was kind of reaching into networks that were like not my own, like trying to find like active practitioners and people, and some of that like was like looking into like things like, there's like really interesting kind of like pagan culture on like Tumblr that I like am not still super intimate with, but I think is super fascinating. I didn't really get deep into like the world of like fanfic, but I think that that's like an also fun like way in which like magic has manifested itself onto the web in a really compelling way, because you have this generation of people coming up online who can have this certain kind of discourse with fantasy genres, with kind of cultural objects that are there, like kind of making their own. And I think that maybe right now it's just kind of more because like the stakes seem like very like intense, and like the language has become kind of a lot more volatile around it, or maybe I'm just seeing more.
And the project that you did, trying to make visible some of the occult workings of the NSA, I think is also like one of the things we really rallied around. Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, so I made astrology charts for all of the Five Eyes spy agencies. After finding this like incredible astrology magazine called The Mountain Astrologer that had this really long article about Snowden and the NSA and astrology, and it did both their charts. And like at no point, did it go like, why is astrology useful for this? I mean, it's an astrology magazine, so it's probably like kind of like everyone's kind of like down with astrology. But it's like that was like the lens through which like this author could like explain this like really complicated political narrative to somebody. And I also just kind of found it like funny, like thinking about like what making a star chart does to an institution, because one, you have to like give it a birthday, which is sort of weird. Like how do you give like an ideological construct like a spy agency a birthday? I mean, you can like it's legal like instantiation or like groundbreaking at its agency, but this sort of like attempt to like kind of build these like mythical origin stories, and then believe that you can somehow like calculate its like true meaning from its chart. The like kind of flippant thing I've said about this before is basically like it's like as reasonable to believe that you can like kind of complete completely understand any institution by like looking at its star chart as it is to believe that you can like justifiably kill people using metadata. So it's kind of like a nice fit.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe this is like our, what's really going on here is we're trying to understand increasingly more monstrous and understandable things. It's part of what's going on right now, and it also feels like part of it is trying to find like an embodied way to relate to this. Like I'm going to hand this back to you, Karen, to talk about affect and to talk about like, you know, this is, for me, this feels like it's a grasping of trying to make real things that are invisible, but also invisible.
Yeah, I mean, I think, oh. Hello? Our mics,
I can hear you, just take my
Well, maybe we're hitting the wind.
Is that one working?
Yes. Yeah,
I think, you know, also as a sociologist of this, one of the most fascinating things is that what we're talking about is historically phenomenally gendered. And, you know, when Deb brought up the kind of priest class, that is no joke, right? This is a world in which, and of course Frank Pasquale will call this the black box society. We are living in a time that is wildly reconstructing itself around us, and we have no access, unless, of course, we try very hard to get to that access. And again, so women have historically used, also been castigated for, using magical practices and spiritual practices and religious practices to find a form of community, affective agency, knowledge, especially we can think about women in a black church, right? This has been a place where women get authority, this is where women get knowledge, this is where women find community, offer each other forms of support. That is no joke, that is real life in the face of deep and structural oppression. So on the one hand, the magical spaces here are real. They offer people practices, linguistic practices, cultural practices, ritual practices that enable people to survive. And the affect there is, I don't think it's good to write it off as some sort of like academic affect, right? It's just some sort of ephemeral thing. This is real attachment. These are real bonds that people make to things, to technologies, to others, to economies. At the same time, that again, we're living in this sort of, a lot of that feeling and that work of community and that work of selfhood is so quickly forced into the market, forced back into the very technologies that right now are not exactly for us. The same, so they are those very black boxed, occulted. So on the one hand, you might be gaining cultural capital or economic capacity by learning occult practices at the same time that the minute you give that up to a data economy, which of course you might be forced to do, right, if you want to have any kind of viable space. Although I will mention to you, by the way, that all of this is throwing like the occult economy into real tailspin, because where did the occult knowledge sort of transpire through? Bookstores and the early internet. This has really blown that up. In a lot of ways, what I'm talking about in terms of I study the occult and then I go online and I become a brand and I share other people and I find my strong community and I share the knowledge, that is really actually setting all of this history of the occult being about a kind of priesthood class where the men have the knowledge and the women do the emotional work into a tailspin. So,
yeah, and you guys can, I'm Michaelis, I'm sorry. Feel free. I know.
Yeah, it's like,
We've
hey, I want to
exchanged a lot of stuff up here right now. Yeah, feel free to also like jump in at this point and not steal my mic if you need a mic to work.
So actually I want, because I talked about technology as being not magic, and Damien in his intro talked about the relationship between technology and magic, I want to hear a little bit more about that.
We're going to keep doing this. It's musical mics. So I don't know that it's, like I think that the idea of the connection between technology and magic, that is coming from the same root, but branching off into differently contextualized practices, doesn't necessarily rest in conflict with the idea that they are not now, currently, the same thing. It just means that at their heart and at their foundation, they both were born from a similar set of ideas, a similar set of constructs that have grown into different visibilities and different ways of conceptualizing what we're doing in them. I think that magic does still have a lot of this kind of prized nature of preferencing the hidden and preferencing the hiding of what gets done and how it gets done, where on, and saying on the outside of its own processes, these are the things that are hidden, these are the things that you cannot know unless you are initiated, unless you do the practice. And then on the other side of that, you have technology, which says, no, you can do this. You just need to know these things. So they're similar practices, and they're both about, understanding what's hidden if you're going to perform them, but magic preferences that hidden nature and prizes its hidden nature, where at least on its face, in public, technology says that it does not.
So I was going to say, the question I was going to ask you is, in what way does technology and magic reveal the shared roots? And one of the ways I think it is precisely what you just said, that although engineering and technology nominally preferences sort of openness, the reality is in many ways it doesn't. And one of the ways in which the sort of barrier, the one that's close to my heart, obviously, is the barrier of actually going to be educated, which until recently was extremely male, and is still, like going through engineering school is I was going to say hard. It is needlessly hard. Like it is definitely sort of an initiation process. I think about, MIT's IHTFP, I hate effing place, and also known as the Institute for Hackathon Foolery and Pranks, right? Which sort of explicitly links together sort of doing these sort of trickster things as hacks and the sort of emotional affect that they often can feel towards their alma mater, because engineering schools are kind of designed a lot around this sort of rigorous, we take pride in our students failing, not our students succeeding, kind of attitude, sort of hazing and ritual, at the end of which you are sort of an initiate. So I see that as kind of a parallel in these two worlds. Yeah. That even though it's nominally open, the reality is that the barriers are so pronounced in terms of gender, in terms of class, in terms of just getting through it, that they still, it still is an initiate class.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the things that all of you have kind of touched on is really pinging for me right now is this idea of that kind of the barriers between gender and class dynamics within both magic and technology, and the fact that at present, one of the things that if you take a look at ritual studies and take a look at the history of magical studies, one of the things you'll see is this history of transgression that exists. But the only ones who can transgress within ritual and magical spaces are those who have the power to do so, those who are privileged to do so, those who are given the initiation and the learning and the knowledge to say, and now I can behave in this way as though I have no power. I can cross this boundary and become this powerlessness in the face of this greater power. And that, I think, is actually still prevalent in both magical and technological and engineering spaces right now. It's like you can bring in someone, you can bring in groups and initiates to this who have the power only because you have these overarching systems of power to give that to say. And by so bringing you in, we are going to highlight, oh, aren't we so generous, aren't we so gracious as to bring in you who would be powerless were it not for us.
Keep pushing you guys. Okay, this is on. One of the things I was thinking between the both of your remarks is this, I don't know exactly how much I want to talk about this, but my attraction to what I understood as magic is it felt like it complicated the world. It felt like it queered the world. It felt like it blurred these boundaries. It was a way to sort of mess with what had been previously hidden or obscured. It was a way to reclaim things that had been pushed to the outside. And I think as the world has become more of this place where, we don't actually understand how power is working, and if we wanted to, how could we even find out? Like on a very basic level of, whether you're talking about the NSA, whether you're talking about, the impact that the Web 2.0 economy has on us, and the collapsing of the entire economy, forcing people or pushing people into these other routes of transforming their very selves into marketable objects, to creating intangible skills that they can then put onto the market. It's making magic feel less fun, or less like of a retreat, or less as like one of these safe spaces that is an alternative to. And I think that was part of what was going on in the kind of early mid-90s understanding of the internet as that is what the internet was at that time. It was that alternative space. And so now that this is absolutely common and in our pockets all of the time, how could it be that alternative space? Like, is there a possibility to reclaim this? Or have we just gone so far down that, if we need something else? Like, I wonder, this feels like sort of a holding pattern right now as we're trying to think through what magic really means in this moment.
If you, I don't know if this is on, but if you love magic, don't talk about it. No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to obscure things anymore, but Capital is on this hunt for more terrains in every single way. So, in some, like one of the things I'm finding very even discouraging about doing academic work is that sometimes I feel like we're thinking things like one moment ahead, but literally what we're doing is opening doors to markets. So, how do you want to work this? Do you want to open up magic? Do you want to like maybe just sort of shut the door and like start to do some stuff in here together? I mean, this is where a whole new conversation about not just personal transformative magic or personal magic that even helps you maybe come into like small pockets of communities, but let's talk about labor. Let's talk about what we're making. Let's talk about things that we can actually have access to and want to think about the way in which we are organizing, the way in which we talk to each other, the way in which we don't shun each other because maybe you do X and I do Y, but to think about this thing that's upon us and how we get through this in much larger, in a way that organizes us at much larger scale.
So resistance is not magic. Resistance is actually quite practical.
Yeah.
Like maybe it doesn't
Practical
serve us
magic.
you know, I think that's the reason why of all the things I talk about on the internet, magic will never be one of them, other than this conversation and what gets archived. I mean, there is a way that I think as we are rewarded for putting more and more of ourselves into the public space and into the market, what do you hold back? And does that then become something magical in a cult just because it is the thing that you can't hold back?
Well, this is maybe one tiny in defense of magic, more in like a cultural space. This is a conversation that came up at Haunted Machines at one point. Tobias asked if we could think of like a contemporary equivalent of witches, familiars, or spirits, and I pretty immediately went to Twitter bots. Bots are basically a weird form of like conjuring spirits and demons that we live with and that do things we do not expect. And I think that like I agree with a lot of your points, Karen, like about just kind of being very mindful about how you exercise it, but I do think there are pockets, and they may be short-lived, because like Twitter could change its mind about letting people do what they're doing at any given moment. But there is a tendency, just like especially within like cultural spaces, where like that is sometimes where magic can happen, and it's the specific kind of magic that is kind of like something that you did not expect coming from something that you initiated, right? It's like it's casting a spell. And it's like an awesome spell that like gives you every word but puts the word witch in front of it. It's great.
I was just going to add that, you know, the idea of opening doors to markets. I mean, I think the Apple ad that quoted Arthur C. Clarke was in 1988 or something. I mean, I kind of feel like that the idea of using magic to sell is sufficiently entrenched that I'm not that worried about opening up other markets. What I'm interested in is basically having the conversation about how do people who are not trying to sell you things, i.e. ordinary people, reclaim this idea of sort of magic as agency, magic as something that opens up spaces. And Twitter bots are a really great example because of how they fit within the sort of economic ecosystem of Twitter. And I remember at Haunted Machines basically saying, like, screw the wizards, we want to be heretics.
I know what I mean witches.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah. So, but basically, heretics or witches or anything sort of like is not part of the mainstream culture. How do we sort of reclaim the ideas of magic for that use, rather than leaving it in the hands of the witches who are trying to keep it for power?
The priesthood class.
Yeah.
Like the current set of things as they are in terms of, we're still trying to figure out who's got what. We're like the setup of things as they are within technological spaces, being that kind of priestly class that we've talked about many times is so, commodified, is so structured and rigid that at this point in time, if you do want to do anything transgressive, if you want to do anything boundary breaking, you have to either come from somewhere within that is so, as I previously noted, so privileged to be within it, that you have all this power to just give it up as you see fit, or you have to come from such a radically altered angle and come at it from a way that nobody's expecting, that nobody's working with.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I spend most of my time on the inside, right, trying to get people to look outside. So the people who have the power, the people who are going to grow up to be technologists, to get them to think more broadly about what they're doing.
Right. And ultimately, I mean, there's a case to be made that that's going to be the most effective route for maybe not a radical change, but to open everything up to a less commodified and more equally opportunistic kind of field where everybody has the kind of open source magic access. Everybody can take that move, as you were saying earlier, from, magic that nobody knows about to tech that everyone can do.
Some moment to collect ourselves in a microphone situation. This is something that I'm just going to throw it out there and see if this resonates for folks. One of the first people that I read on magic was Starhawk, who's an interesting person to read on magic because she comes out of kind of the feminist and peace movements. And so there's a politics really built into her understanding of magic. And I think it was in her kind of trying to create a history of magic, and particularly women's practice of magic, she connects the attacks on witches with the rise of capital, with the enclosure movement. And so is that also part of what's going on right now? As these open spaces online are being closed down, forget sort of how things actually work, but having spaces to have these conversations and even talk about them, I think there's a reason that there's a tension, well, how much do we want to say about this, and how much do we want this to become a thing, and is there going to be some bullshit future conference in 3 weeks that's all about magic if we talk about this too much? I think that that's happening both. Yes, it is happening. But sorry, Rin. I know. Is part of this just a loss of space?
Yes.
You said yes.
Yes. I don't know if I can say more. Expansion and enclosure, those are the two moves of capital. That's what it searches for, and I think that we are deeply complicit in that, whether we want to or not. So is there going to be a bullshit conference? I'm sure it's happening right now. It's on Twitter. Is there? Much bigger than us. That's one of the things that I think the magic we have tended to understand puts us at the center of the universe as magical selves, magical entities, and that is a problem because the world is magical. It's bigger than us. It's happening, right? I don't know. Yes, our spaces are changing. They're closing down. But at the same time, I love what all of you are saying. I specifically love what Deb is saying about there's a way in which this showing the past, showing the technology, bringing the open access magic is really fascinating to me as even just, very practically, I'm a public university educator, so I'm fascinated that one of the ways forward here is not necessarily to occlude, and like I said, shut the door and keep it quiet, but is actually to blow it up, to bring more people into the conversation of how little minerals work. That's awesome.
Just maybe to the thing you were saying about the world as magic, as opposed to centering it in itself. It was inside us all along.
Just
right?
me. I'm the ring.
I mean, one of the other things that I've noticed, in talking about a lot of this with other people, is that magic often also becomes kind of a stand-in for faith, right? And people who do things with technology tend to the second you say faith, they kind of freak out and hide under chairs because they the whole God thing. They just they're allergic to it. Maybe that's not entirely fair, but it's there's a sense where it's it is the willingness to kind of embrace that which you cannot understand, or that there are things that are beyond your comprehension. Yep. I think that is actually a very valuable idea that is increasing in a world where we kind of where it's increasingly kind of assumed that one can engineer their way out of anything. Right. That it is a lot harder to embrace the idea that maybe you don't know shit.
Although what you're saying, Ingrid, reminds me. So we had a great conversation at Magic Codes about whether the kind of empiricism of data was still science. Remember that conversation? Right, yeah. Where we were talking about so you're right, no technician is going to say, I'm a wizard, I'm really a wizard, even if that's their logo, right? There's still this kind of that is religion or spirituality, and it's anti-scientific, it's anti-rational. Yet, I'm putting now I'm investing in an infrastructure, an architectural and algorithmic infrastructure that I desire to be predictive, that I desire to know more than I could ever know, that I am going to now sort of enable to create this empiricism that is preemptive, and so maybe Deb can talk to this too. In some ways what's happening, especially around data science, is actually moving very far away from the scientific project. So is it magic, or is it something else? Is it fascism?
Well, I think it was my friend Quinn Norton who said that it was sort of a post-Enlightenment version of science, right? So for the science, I definitely, the research that I did, I would laboriously do experiments, and then I would put in one box in an Excel spreadsheet. And then I would go do more experiments, and then I would put in another box in my spreadsheet. which is very different from the idea that you have a sort of a large quantity of data and you can, basically given a big enough data set, all hypotheses are true, right? At that point, it becomes less about what your data says and more about what are the questions that you're asking your data. And I just sort of realized the parallel between having like a large data set about like, people's Facebook preferences and using it to figure out bank loans with like asking questions of your crystal ball, right? Yeah. It's basically there's a ton of information there. What you get out is based on what the questions you're asking are. And we've already seen this being used in, for example, mining. The example that I can think of offhand, and I'm not sure how far I went along with this idea of mining what kind of music, what kind of bands people say they like on Twitter or on Facebook, and using that to decide whether or not they get a mortgage based on sort of cultural factors. So, and so this idea of that basically big data and data science, because it is not directly observable, because the data sets are too big to sort of keep in your head, then they're sort of extremely vulnerable to the questions you're asking of that crystal ball.
So like at that point you're looking at data scrying, right?
Yeah.
Like you're looking at scrying in this sense of you're going to take this very vast nebulous set of contextualized factors and say, based on the question at the time of day at this particular point in time, what do I get out of it? Like Jung, when he talked about the tarot I Ching, he was looking at this like and saying, you're not getting necessarily a glimpse at the quote-unquote future. What you're getting is a glimpse at where you are now and what you're most likely to be doing based on this vast set of interpretational symbolism. And how you interpret it is based very much on the mindset you have when you ask your question. And I think that's exactly where we are right now. Sarah, I thought you were reading.
No, I'm not sure if we want to try and answer
Yeah,
that.
we can.
Maybe we should open it to questions.
Absolutely. And should we mic the questions as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, who has, and we also have questions on Twitter, so maybe we'll start with one of those and figure out how to pass the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So while there's been a lot going on on Twitter, people are really fascinated by the topic and people are about the different definitions and so on. And there's a back and forth between dichotomies, right? So male and female, the magic and non-magic, and how it's possible to distinguish them or not. So there's been one notice from Nick Paul is saying, well, the Athena example you gave is like the cleverness in arts against brute force.
Yes.
So this is also an example of how we could think about technology. And then Jenny Davis asking how actually technology is magic until it reveals itself as an illusion, which I think would be another thing maybe you want to react to that.
That's a very interesting perspective.
Maybe this works for you.
Yeah, I think it's
Everybody? No? That's actually a very interesting perspective, the idea that it's magic until technology is magic until it reveals itself in its operations, at which point it kind of becomes banal, right? It becomes again our everyday, it's in our pockets. And then it's nothing special anymore, it's nothing, the wonder is gone out of it, the awe is gone out of it. But there's also this, within ritual practices and religious traditions, and mystical practices all over the world, there's this idea that we have to find the awe and wonder in our everyday again. We have to look at everything around us again and say, no, this thing is in itself miraculous. This is magical. Like, yes, the sunset's magical, wonderful, it makes me cry. No, but it's magical. Like this idea that there are these astronomical forces and physical processes at work in this tight, prescriptive dance that allows us to see and experience this in the way that we do. It's glorious. And our appreciation of that is crucial if we're going to make something happen in this world.
Let me tell you why iPhone glass is so amazing.
Yes, yes,
Right.
exactly.
Right, it's something that you literally look through.
Right, exactly.
Let's do questions.
Well, there's a question over there.
Yeah, and you've got a mic, great.
Yes.
Hello, Nick.
Thanks so much. This is really great. I have a question about magic and Orientalism. And it relates there's a few things going on here. One is the sort of North Atlantic magic of which we've been focusing in these conversations sort of here and generally. The other is the way that magic as a term is sort of a little opening in the wall of Western knowledge practices for other knowledge practices from around the world that aren't legible as science or technology to make their way in, right? And so there's this idea that something that you could have also called technology, if it comes from someplace that's not, Euro-America, then it's magic because people don't truly understand how it works, although they've been doing it for 1,000 years and it appears to work just fine. So that's sort of part of the question. The other part of the question is, does this connect then to this Orientalism in, say, Silicon Valley around job titles like guru, ninja, etc.? So I'm curious about how all of this goes together in this simultaneous way that magic, we don't talk about, what people might call magic in other parts of the world. We talk about scrying and wizards and Aleister Crowley and so on.
So that's probably my favorite example of that. There was an article in Eon, I think, like in the last week or so, about how when mechanical automata first came to Europe, they were really sort of sold as these things are magical. And so the history of automata has a long history in Europe that's really closely tied with the idea of them being magical, as an example of that, where the components.
They also come from the East.
Yeah, no, that's what it was, yeah. So, but they were basically, in Europe, they were like, oh, well, these are magical, not these are physical devices that you can understand. I will let someone else take the Guru Ninja question.
I mean, the word guru literally means spiritual teacher. I mean, so to call yourself a web guru, I mean, that's a loaded appellation in and of itself. You at that point in time have taken onto yourself these qualities of, oh, I know the mystical secrets of the web that you do not know, and so I will solve your problems and guide you, my child. And I will take your money.
Yep.
So thank you, and I will teach you, but I won't teach you. So yeah, I mean, I think that's actually well at work within our current context.
Is this on?
Yeah.
There's also an incredible market right now for meditative spiritual practices in tech.
Yes.
And Google hires, the sort of futures guru. It's not just the web guru.
Right.
So where that kind of spirituality that is emerging from the last maybe 20 years also crashes into what remains of magic, or what, sort of what Melissa's pointing us to. I don't know.
Since we're near to you.
Okay.
We were talking about whether we try and keep magic as a closed thing, a closed tool for us to think about, or whether we open it up and blow it up. I'm wondering, is it possible to blow it up in a direction? So activists get this weapon first, and marketers kind of weaponize it against us. So how do we shape it for challenges, if you will?
Do we have a mic still moving in the audience for questions? Okay, sorry.
We want to keep one out there. So yeah, can we blow this up in a direction? Do we have a choice? Can we actually direct how magic is prevailing metaphor or magic is actual thing? Who's fancy this into?
Late capitalism is tricky that way, right? It's really good at kind of being omnidirectional. I mean, because one of the first things when you were asking that question, I thought was I was trying to think trying to find an example of what has any kind of instrument of tremendous power, rhetorical or otherwise, landed in the hands of those pursuing equality and justice first.
Right.
And that's the thing about instruments of power. They're usually made by those who seek it, right? So trying to figure out how to do, I think that comes in the ones it is possible, I think, for a individual maybe to shape those things and have agents on it, whether I'm not sure what the collective force to push magic out of the hands of the valley of the magic the valley of the shadow of the
Some Christian magic there.
yeah, but I think that it is a worthy objective. I mean, at one point in Quantum Machines, Tobias Ravello, the organizer, asked me basically or asked the panel, whether you would choose to live in a world with no magic or magic as kind of a contested ground. And I was like, who the hell wants to live in a world with no magic?
Right.
That sounds terrible. It is always going to get trouble. That's sort of what power is about. So I don't know if that answers the question.
In the back, do you have a microphone?
Yes. Thank you very much. for everyone, and I guess this is a general question. I'm hearing two slightly separate discourses, one about magic as it relates to understanding, maybe like black box technology and building that up, and then the other having to do with magic is prediction. And I'm wondering for everyone, if you think it's better to think about those two trends together, or if it's better to distinguish them and separate them?
No, I think that they are entangled. Those technologies are willfully obscured, and they are guided towards becoming predictive technologies precisely because they are becoming incredibly powerful technologies. That is preemptive technology that will, unless we fight against it, will always be obscured. So, again, I sort of always refer back to my public university experience, that this is also not an even playing field. You have to always understand that this technology is intentionally going to be deployed differently across different populations. And so it's obscured from us, but it's also preemptive and it's powerfully productive. Right? So from my perspective, those two things go hand in hand. Those are.
And what Kevin said. But also, it's actually your answer just now got me thinking about something, this idea of the uneven and unequal distribution and the concept of how do we get the disruptive tools into the hands of the people that are trying to do the most beneficial disruption. And this idea that through history, if you're looking at religious dissemination and the ideas of disruptive religious technologies, you're seeing this process of there are certain groups that have sought to, over time, disrupt thoroughly this unequal distribution of power, to disrupt these mechanisms of control. But even then, those systems do, unfortunately, eventually become themselves mechanisms of control.
Sure.
And that process, that back and forth, is I think what Amber was getting at, and I think that's exactly the constant dance. Like it's more pronounced, I think, here in late capitalism, but I think it's always at play. It's this back and forth.
And this came up at Magic Coast, but I'm thinking about the idea of police cameras now as almost like a time machine.
Yeah.
Like we can go back in time and we can see what happened in that incident down the street 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 5 days ago. And as soon as, I forget who said this, it may have been Michael Denzel Smith, but like, as soon as the police are like, yeah, we want police cameras, we should say perhaps that is not quite the powerful technology we thought it was.
Right there.
Or perhaps it's a powerful technology they want for themselves, for their own purposes, to control the data, to control how it gets out. So like, just as an illustration, that came up a lot in that space.
I will run the microphone.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that came up was like a priestly class or initiative, and just I'd like you to comment on this. So in order for you to go to pure science, you have to take 2 or 3 classes of calculus, chemistry, physics, blah 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 before you even go into inside your first pure science class. And then all of a sudden there's these boot camps, and then all of a sudden you have these people who are art history majors, philosophy majors, 12 weeks, they're out into the world. And then there's some resistance also from people who are pure science majors. I'd like you to comment on that. Is that like a reformation type of thing? And what is the rhyming of history?
So we like to call that the math science death camp or death march, the first couple of years that you have to do before you get to doing any real technology. And so we're actually, there's the boot camps that are very sort of much focused on sort of getting you around the workforce. But in the sort of parallel thing is things like fab labs and sort of macro programs. These are all sort of in the same space, right? Of how do we open up these spaces so that people can learn. I think individual ones can be have issues, but I think that the idea, I'm basically always in favor of democratizing technological knowledge, even though there, as I said, individual instances of it might not be the best possible instantiations of it. But despite the fact that I'm an engineering professor, like the thing I'm actually trying to do is democratize access to this type of knowledge.
Folks, so maybe we should just keep questions rolling because we have about 10 minutes left. Yes, I see a hand there. Thank you for helping run the mic.
Hi, this mic is on, it's good. I wonder if we could talk about, if you're interested, a bit about what technology, what is the function of technology in a way, because I feel today we are very cynical about a lot of things. We're not really allowed to believe in God for that matter, or for like any spirituality. I feel like we're not really allowed to believe that anymore, or at least there's like a big, disillusioned about what that is, and I feel like technology kind of like took the place of that. You know, like there are a lot of people that are hopeful that we'll be able to like solve a lot of like social problems and in general like a lot of things with technology. If we only knew that code, they could do this and that, and it is like a kind of magical spell. And I feel, yeah, technology has like kind of this function of like being our hope, you know, for the future, because I feel like every other thing is like doesn't seem so hopeful right now. Like we're not moving towards like big great good, but I think technology is kind of like providing the space of like making us believe that we get somewhere better, that we make that happen, and everything will be beautiful. And yeah, maybe we could talk a bit about that. Like if there's really that potential for maybe the social change that we need so badly. And yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, one of the things that your question raised for me is something about how the expectations of what we thought technology was supposed to do for us. And I mean, in particular, I'm thinking of like the web. What we thought the web was supposed to do changed at a certain point. And I think Google played a very large role in it insofar as at a certain point, like the expectation became that applications on the internet would meet our needs before we knew exactly what they were. Like, you know, it would fit, like autocomplete is this sort of like magical instrument of kind of like telling you what you actually wanted, or like it already can figure it out for you, or like online dating being this thing that like, we found you this thing that you didn't even know you wanted it, but like we knew before you. I think there is a way in which that plays into the changing dynamic, or the way in which it has become, or it can be, I don't know if it always is a like proxy for like a thing to believe in, because there is this earnest attempt to kind of insist that like it does know. It knows you better than you know you. And I like that maybe in contrast to an internet that was maybe like less efficient, but kind of demanded slightly more like kind of searching. Like literally a phrase to search. Like it's like when you search now, it's like you're kind of actually just like looking for like you want something like to be immediately there. Like most people don't go to like page 12 of Google. I do. I like find that super fun, but that's like yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing is, Sir Ursula Franklin, in her, there's actually a series of lectures called The Real World of Technology. She makes the case that almost all technology is sold basically on the promise of individual agency. And so the best known example of this is the car, right, which is about sort of individual freedom, and that's what it was sort of sold on. And then, you know, we have 12-mile-long traffic jams. She also talked about how the sewing machine was similarly sold as individual agency and begat sweatshops. So I think part of the issue about technology being the new faith is the fact that it's always sold on providing what Ingrid talked about earlier about sort of agency in the world versus the things you can control versus things you can't control. And then it doesn't necessarily fulfill, and often does not fulfill those promises, or brings in other sort of large-scale consequences that they weren't thought of.
I just want to quickly add that technology as a sort of utopian solution is also a capital magnet at the moment.
Yes.
So whereas like we want to have a workers union and we're going to demand no money for that. But if you come up with some sort of techno solution, especially if it's a data aggregator, love that, then we give you money. So right now, administrators all over the world are trying to figure out how they can get a techno solution because it's the only place that the capital wants to go towards. So it's a problem.
And there is at this point also, I mean, when we think about it, it's kind of become a joke at this point overarchingly, but singularity is nerd rapture. Right? The idea that eventually we will hit that technological point where technology will literally solve literally all of our problems, not just in this kind of nebulous way, but in a very real-time, physical way. Technology will solve all of our problems. And that idea does still have a lot of those underpinnings of faith and this kind of very Manichaean, black and white, good and evil kind of way of thinking about what we deserve. And I think that's actually been harmful in that same kind of capital structure that Karen saw.
We need to have like a whole capitalism at Magic.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Right
do.
now,
Yes,
I think we could go there. You know, is there tech magic without capital? I mean, you know, there was magic without capital. I want to get deeper into questions while we have time, and really stick your hand up so I can see your hand and see you. I don't want to miss anybody. Yes. We'll send a microphone over to you.
I want to ask about spirituality in the tech world, and do you think that people in the tech world are looking at spirituality as a technology?
Yes. Short answer, yes. spirituality as business practice. You're actually someone the person that I'm staying with right now while I'm up this way did a dissertation on the overlap between spirituality and religious practices and the business world. And he's this guy Desper, so he's really, really brilliant guy. Talks about the practices of spiritual and religious community within a framework like Starbucks, and how the overarching corporate structure sees the opportunity within faith practices, religious practices, spiritual practices to build this sense of community amongst the workers that gives them this deeper investment than they will ever consciously realize to the place where they work and the place where they get their paycheck. So it makes this kind of not necessarily a technological aspect, but a community building aspect for economic gain.
I'll just also say, kind of, this is late Foucault, right? They become technologies of the self. And that's a type of self that is self-managed, seemingly ethical, very much can plug itself into a homo economicus model. So it's, again, just maybe a broader sense of technology, but yeah, it's a perfect overlap. You can become a self-managing, ethical entity, perfecting yourself through these rigorous practices. My God.
Just two like kind of texts that like immediately made me think of, or both are about cults and technology. They're really great. One is Kate Lossy wrote a really great essay. I don't remember where it was published, but it was sort of about like the role of like kind of like cult logic being kind of imbued into startups. And Natalie Kane's remarks actually at the 100 Machines conference talking about sort of the concept of the cargo cult and sort of the invention of these like Silicon Alley, Silicon Roundabout, Silicon barge, I don't know. Sort of like dropping of that into space.
The first thing I thought of when your question was, oh God, his name has escaped me. The 4-hour fill in blank guy.
Tim Ferriss.
It's the quantified self, that's what you're talking about, this ultimately managed self, and like to the extent that he eventually dabbles in Tantra and is still regarded as a business guru and can make a living doing that. Like it's interesting that somebody like that can kind of collapse magic into themselves and derive power and capital from it. We need to get your mic, but I'll just hand it to you. There's one right behind you. Sandwich.
This is so amazing for me, thank you. But it dawns on me, there's this thing I've been watching with skinwalking, where our technology is literally becoming skinwalking mechanisms. Apple Watch is just a way of transferring your will to someone else. And why we're not talking about inhabiting each other via technology is blowing my mind.
Siri just starts speaking.
I'm invoking technology.
This idea of skinwalking, if those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with this idea of moving your will, your mind, your consciousness from one body to the next, from one form to the next. And either doing that in some traditions by changing your form or by literally going into a trance or meditative state and projecting your conscious will into the body of something else that already exists. And more of our technology, I think what we're seeing is actually, we are seeing more and more of ourselves pushing this sense of will and consciousness out into the world. Like, I can take myself and my daily tasks, and I can push them onto your sensorium, and I can make you viscerally and unceasingly aware of exactly where I am and what I'm doing, and I can experience my world through you now. Narcissism and
And I just wanted to say the other side of that. So I think I mentioned Quinn already. Quinn basically talks about how she keeps part of her brain in the brains of like a few dozen or scores of people around the planet, right? That basically she has this sort of distributed knowledge, sort of a network of people that she knows that she can talk to and ask. And I certainly feel the same thing. So I feel like there's two sides. There's the sort of pushing your will out, but there's also feeling that there's part of you in lots of other people's brains, and having lots of other people's brains that you have access to.
The network itself. In a way that actually, does really start to feel like magic. And it's just people together. We're at time, unfortunately. So I suggest that you all keep chatting at each other on Twitter and to each other and becoming each other's outboard network brains. Stay tuned next time for Magic and Capitalism.
Mark Scott Brown.
We'll find a way to make that one happen. Thank you all. This was a phenomenal conversation. I literally had no idea what was going to happen. So you made me